Hello my friends, and welcome to The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. I'm Kathleen Dames and I'll be your guide over the next 12 episodes while we knit a sweater together. This is episode 0. Today I'll tell you where to get the pattern along with what you'll need to get started. We won't get started for a few weeks so you can get through the holidays and sort out your yarn choice. I am a knitter, a knitwear designer, and a bit of a sweater evangelist here in New York City. While I'm very fond of all sorts of knitted accessories, I love knitting garments. Creating the fabric while knitting a sweater is so much fun. And taking advantage of knitted fabric's flexibility to make something that fits the body, that just makes me feel super clever. So, I have designed men's and women's sweaters for Jane Austen Knits, Interweave Knits, Knitty.com, and other publications, as well as self-publishing my own patterns. You can find all of my stuff on Ravelry. Gotten that out of the way, let me introduce you to the Solstice Cardi as modeled by my lovely silent co-host, Lady Jane. The Solstice Cardi is an almost seamless bottom-up Raglan yoke sweater with integrated button bands knit in a slightly loose gauge in fingering weight yarn. Oh my God, what does all that mean? So, almost seamless means we will start knitting the body as one piece when we need to knit it flat so that it can be a cardigan. To make sure that the gauge matches, we will also knit the sleeves flat. And the reason for that is so that the gauge will match. Sometimes the difference between knitting flat versus knitting in the round is significant enough to make things look a little wonky. So we will need to seam up the sleeves. It's okay, you can do it, I promise. Next, bottom up means that we start down here at the hem and at the cuffs and work our way up the body. Some knitters prefer working top down, but I don't, because you can, first of all, knit a sleeve as a secondary gauge swatch to make sure that you're really on track with your gauge. It also inoculates you from second sock syndrome. More on that later. You also won't have to wrestle with the entire sweater body to knit the sleeves. In my experience, the place where you will need to adjust your sweater is in the yoke for a better fit. And if you've started top down, it's harder to fix that. Plus, knitting the yoke is just fun. It's where all the action happens, where you take some pieces of fabric and you shape them to fit the top of your body. Okay, a raglan yoke. That's these diagonal lines. A baseball tee is a good example of that. And these lines are actually decreases that will shape the top of the sweater to your shoulders. It's one of the more straightforward yoke styles, which hopefully will make it less intimidating for you to knit, because you can knit it, you can do it, I promise. And in future seasons, we will knit more complicated yokes, but I thought this was a good way to start. Integrated button bands. What in the world is that? If you've watched me on Periscope, you know that I love doing this, what's called integrated button band, where you knit it as you go along. A lot of other cardigan patterns will have you go back after you've finished the sweater, pick up stitches along both front edges and around the collar, and knit on a button band. I can do this, you can do this, I promise, but I don't wanna. When I cast off the top of my sweater at the back of the neck, I wanna be finished. So I use what's called integrated button bands. I also will have you do the buttonholes as we go along on both sides. And this will ensure that you will know exactly where to sew on your buttons. 6 stitches to the inch is what we're working with here. For fingering weight yarn, that's a little on the loose side. Often fingering weight yarn is used to knit socks, which are knit at 8 or 9 stitches to the inch, because socks need to be durable and have a dense fabric. But we don't want our sweater to be dense, do we? I don't think so. And what I call fingering weight yarn is also known as sock yarn or 4-ply, depending on your knittery's dialect. The great thing about sock yarn too is that these days there are so many amazing yarnies out there dyeing yarn, and a lot of them start with sock yarn because it's superwash and it's harder to felt. So you can find the most gorgeous yarns out there, and we'll talk about more about yarn in episode 2. So while I knit up the sample you see here on Lady Jane a while ago, I will be knitting another sample along with you. So what will you need? First and foremost, you will need the pattern. To get your copy, visit KathleenDames.com/thesweater and sign up for the newsletter. Once you sign up for the newsletter, a PDF of the pattern will be delivered right to your inbox. And after that, every time there's an episode, you will also get an email notifying you that it's up on YouTube, and it'll include a link so that you can watch it right there. Once the season ends, the pattern will be available for sale in my Ravelry shop, and subscribers to the newsletter will receive a coupon for a substantial discount if they want to keep the pattern in their Ravelry library. The pattern has been written and tested by me, edited by the talented Corinna Ferguson of Picnic Knits, and professionally laid out by me. I was an art director in book publishing in a former life before I became obsessed with knitting. Once you have your copy of the pattern, you will need your yarn and needles. I'll have plenty more to say about them in future episodes, particularly episode 2. But for now, note that you will need approximately 600 to 1,500 yards of fingering weight yarn, depending on your size. And the pattern is written in 7 sizes from 28-inch to 52-inch finished bust. And what that means is that's the size of the sweater. And we will talk about choosing size, depending on your measurements, in episode 1, the pattern. And in case you're starting to freak out, I promise you, none of this is hard. You can do it. I promise you, you can totally do this. Knitting a sweater isn't nearly as hard as you think. It's just knitting a lot more stitches. And you deserve a sweater of your very own, made out of yarn you're excited to knit with, that fits you. Okay, we will need to be honest with ourselves about our dimensions, but that will be between you and your tape measure. One of the great things about knitting your own garments is no tags. It's no one's business but yours what your size is. And when we create our own garments, we can make them fit us beautifully, highlighting our assets, skimming over the parts we don't like so much, and just making a beautiful sweater that fits you. And please remember, no body is perfect, but we can all look lovely in our sweaters. When we finish, not only will you have your very own sweater, but you will also have learned a bunch of tips and tricks that you can use in all your knitting projects. One note, I will talk a lot about and show you knitting techniques as we go along, but I will not teach you how to knit. There are plenty of online and offline resources for that, other YouTube channels, as well as your local yarn or craft store. But if you know the basics, knit, purl, cast on, bind off, the basics of increasing and decreasing, then we can knit this sweater together. So meet me here on January 8th with your pattern and your tape measure so we can get started. Until then, happy knitting, and thanks so much for joining me for this adventure of the sweater with Kathleen Dames. Bye.